Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're pulling back the curtain on digital forensics. Think of it as detective work for the digital age. Basically a systematic process for finding and understanding digital evidence. Whether you're a professional looking to sharpen your skills, or maybe you're just fascinated by how these digital investigations actually work, you're definitely in the right place.
Yeah, and in this deep dive, our aim is really to give you a comprehensive look at the entire forensic analysis process. We'll be drawing on, a whole wealth of information from the high-level strategies involved right down to the specific hands-on techniques and, crucially, the legal principles that govern this whole field. We really want to provide a clear picture of how it all fits together.
Okay, let's unpack this then.
Yeah.
Starting with what needs to happen even before any actual investigation gets underway, these pre-investigation considerations. Now, it might seem like digital forensics is just, plugging in a device and running some software, but our source material makes it clear it's a much more strategic game, right?
Oh, absolutely. Relying on some kind of generic checklist just won't cut it. It really won't. Every single investigation is unique. It's shaped by the specific tech, involved the operating systems, the network setup, maybe, and also the human element, the nature of the crime, if there is one, and who the suspects might be. So because of all these unique factors, a tailored strategy is, well, essential every single time.
That makes a lot of sense. You can't really have a cookie-cutter approach when you're dealing with such a diverse range of digital environments. So what are some of the initial key strategic decisions investigators need to make?
One of the very first, and maybe most important, is a realistic assessment of the resources available. That's both the equipment and the actual expertise. And this isn't just a one-time expense, It's an ongoing commitment. You have to think about upgrading hardware, training personnel, keeping current with the latest techniques. Things change so fast in the digital realm, so investigators just have to evolve right along with it.
Right, it's a moving target. You can't just invest in some tools and expect to be set forever. Speaking of tools, the forensic workstation seems like the central hub for analysis. What are some of the important factors to consider when setting one up?
Yeah, the ideal configuration for a forensic workstation, that's a frequent discussion point in the field, definitely. Things like the amount of RAM, the type and capacity of storage drives, SSDs versus traditional hard drives, the processing power of the CPU, even the choice of operating system. It's all debated. But ultimately, the best setup is really a strategic balance. It depends on the available budget and the types of digital evidence the investigator typically encounters.
So it's not purely a technical question. Practical limitations play a big role too. Our source gives some examples from Sumerai just to illustrate the spectrum of options. What kind of capabilities do different investment levels typically offer?
Certainly. So a more, let's say, entry-level workstation, maybe around $8,000, might feature an Intel Core i9 processor, perhaps 32 GB of fast RAM, and say a 500 GB NVMe SSD. Now, that NVMe SSD is pretty key because it offers significantly faster read and write speeds compared to older SSDs, and that translates directly to quicker processing of evidence. This kind of setup gives you a solid foundation, though you'll definitely need more storage for holding the actual forensic images themselves.
Right.
Now, on the higher end, maybe exceeding $18,000, you might see things like dual Intel Xeon Gold processors, a massive 128 GB of RAM, multiple terabyte-sized high-speed SSDs dedicated to different tasks, a powerful graphics card, and substantial hard drive capacity, often arranged in a RAID configuration.
RAID, okay.
Yeah, that RAID setup, basically, it often provides both increased storage capacity and redundancy. So if one drive fails, the data is still safe. Sumerai also offers these high-performance forensic laptops like the Tolino Omega. They boast similar high-end specs, powerful Intel Core i9s, lots of RAM, fast SSDs, dedicated NVIDIA graphics.
Wow, that high-end setup sounds incredibly powerful. But our source also emphasizes that you don't necessarily need to spend a fortune to get the job done, right? It's not always about the most expensive gear.
That's absolutely correct. While more powerful hardware can definitely speed up the analysis, and that can be critical in time-sensitive investigations, less expensive equipment can achieve the exact same results. The main trade-off is often just the time it takes to process and analyze the data. Smaller organizations or maybe individual investigators, they need to make strategic decisions about where to allocate their resources.
Okay. Now, sometimes the digital evidence isn't conveniently located in the lab. Investigators often have to go out into the field. That's where the response kit comes in. What's the purpose of this kit, and what are the absolute must-have items?
Yeah, the response kit. Its fundamental purpose is to give investigators all the essential tools they need right there on location. to locate, document, and carefully collect digital evidence, all while ensuring the integrity of that evidence. Think of it like a mobile forensic toolkit, basically. Key items include a good digital camera. Both still and video capabilities are really vital for thoroughly documenting the scene. That visual record can be crucial later on. Protective gloves, ideally latex or nitrile, are necessary, both to protect the evidence from, your fingerprints, and also to safeguard the investigator from potential biohazards at the scene.
Biohazards. Right, that's a stark reminder that these investigations aren't always happening in clean office environments.
Exactly. What else? You'll find notepads for meticulously documenting every single action taken, any conversations, details about the scene itself, the basic facts of the case. Organizational paperwork, things like property reports, evidence tags, or labels, they're critical for maintaining a clear, unbroken record of what was collected and where it came from. For physically securing the digital media, you'll need paper or anti-static bags. They prevent physical damage and protect sensitive electronics from static electricity. And blank storage media itself is, of course, a core component. This might include various sizes and types of hard drives, SSDs, USB drives. These are particularly useful in corporate investigations, maybe for tasks like collecting server logs without needing to shut down critical systems.
Right, you definitely can't just power off a company's main server.
Yeah.
And I imagine ensuring the data isn't accidentally altered during collection is a top priority. That's where write blockers come in, isn't it?
Precisely. Write-blocking devices, both hardware options like the Tableau TK8U and software tools such as Sumery's Paladin, are absolutely essential, non-negotiable really. They function like a read-only filter, basically preventing any data from being written to the original evidence during the acquisition process. For mobile devices, materials that provide frequency shielding like Faraday bags or even just heavy-duty aluminum foil can prevent remote wiping or other remote commands from affecting the device.
Ah, so stopping remote access.
Yeah. And if possible, putting the device in airplane mode is also crucial. Any changes made to the device's state, like putting it in airplane mode, must be carefully documented. A set of precision screwdrivers is often needed for disassembling devices to get at internal components. You'll also find miscellaneous but essential items like various cables, USB hubs, maybe even a spare mouse and keyboard for on-site systems in commercial settings. For network investigations, maybe a network tap. And a forensic laptop, of course, loaded with up-to-date software and digital versions of necessary forms, helpful applications. It's a vital part of the kit. Oh, and if international travel is involved, encryption for protecting acquired data is important, and also physical software license keys, dongles, they're often called for commercial forensic software.
That's quite a comprehensive set of tools. How do investigators typically transport all of this equipment safely? I mean, it sounds like a lot to carry.
Yeah, it can be. A rugged, watertight, and crush-proof case, often a Pelican-style case, is highly recommended. It transports the response kit and protects the sensitive equipment inside from damage. If you're flying, using TSA-compliant locks is a good practice too. But it's important to remember the specific contents of a response kit aren't set in stone. The ideal kit is really customized based on the investigator's budget, the type of organization they work for, and the specific kinds of tasks they anticipate encountering. Experienced investigators will continually refine their kits based on their real-world experiences, adding things, taking things out.
Got it. So that covers the physical tools of the trade. What about the software used in digital forensics? I know there's a range of commercial and open source options available.
Yes, the choice between commercial and open source forensic software is another area of consideration, but it is absolutely paramount. I can't stress this enough that any professional forensic work relies on fully licensed software. Using pirated software can severely damage the credibility of an investigation and the reputation of the organization involved. It can potentially lead to legal challenges to the evidence itself.
That's a really critical point. You can't expect to build a solid case using ethically questionable tools. So what are the main differences then between going with open source versus commercial software?
Well, open source tools are generally available for free use, which is a huge advantage, especially for smaller organizations or individuals. However, they often come with limitations in terms of formal technical support. Users typically have to rely on community forums and their own technical skills. Many open source tools also primarily use a command line interface, which, might be less intuitive for those not comfortable typing commands.
Right, not as user-friendly, perhaps.
Yeah, exactly. Commercial software, on the other hand, usually provides comprehensive customer support, detailed documentation, and regular updates. These tools often have user-friendly graphical interfaces, which can speed up workflows. The main drawback, of course, is the cost of licensing. In terms of pure functionality, many forensic tasks can be accomplished using either open source or commercial tools, though sometimes it might require using multiple open source programs to achieve what a single commercial suite offers.
And our source material emphasizes that the reliability and validation of these tools are absolutely crucial, regardless of whether they cost money or not. It's not just about the price tag.
Exactly. The question isn't whether a piece of software is court approved. There's no official certification like that in digital forensics. What truly matters is whether the tool consistently produces accurate and reliable results, and whether it is generally accepted and trusted within the digital forensics community. In the United States, legal frameworks like the Daubert Standard, which was further clarified by the Kumho-Tyre-Cubby v. Carmichael case, provide guidelines for evaluating the admissibility of scientific and technical evidence. And that includes the tools and methods used in digital forensics. Factors like whether a tool has been tested and peer-reviewed, its known error rate, the existence of industry standards for its use, and its general acceptance within the relevant scientific community. These are all taken into account.
So the investigator's own competence in using and, importantly, validating the software is just as important as the software itself.
Precisely. The National Institute of Standards and Technology, NIST, has a computer forensic tool testing project, CFTT. It's an invaluable resource for independent testing and validation of forensic tools. It's considered a best practice to validate the tools you use at least annually or whenever they receive significant updates. And that's regardless of whether you're working in the public or private sector. The Casey Anthony case. That's a powerful real-world example. A misunderstanding of how a forensic tool interpreted internet history led to some significant misinterpretations in that case. It really underscores why rigorous tool validation and cross-verification using multiple tools are absolutely essential. You need to be sure your tools are telling you the right story.
That's a sobering illustration of the potential pitfalls, for sure. What are some specific examples of open source and commercial tools that digital forensics professionals might use day to day?
Sure. Some widely used open source forensic tools include Autopsy. That's a comprehensive graphical interface for many underlying tools. There's the SIFT workstation, a powerful Linux-based virtual machine preloaded with a huge array of forensic utilities. The Paladin Forensic Suite, another user-friendly Linux distribution designed for forensics. And Sakane, which offers a graphical environment and a collection of open source tools. On the commercial side, for Windows investigations, popular options include Xway's Forensics, EnCase, FTK, that's Forensic Toolkit, Forensic Explorer, Belkasoft Evidence Center, and AXIOM. For Macintosh systems, you might encounter Celebreed Inspector, Recon Lab, or Recon ITR, and for Linux-based investigations, they're Smart. But this is just a selection, of course. Each tool has its own particular strengths and areas where it excels.
It really sounds like keeping abreast of the available tools and their capabilities is an ongoing learning process in itself. And that naturally leads us to the importance of forensic investigator training. It's clearly not just about having the right tools, it's about having the skilled individuals who know how to use them effectively and interpret the results correctly.
Absolutely. Continuous training is fundamental for anyone pursuing a career in digital forensics. You really can't stand still. An initial training course provides a foundation, sure, but the field is constantly evolving. So investigators need to commit to lifelong learning to keep their skills and knowledge current. Professional certifications can indicate a certain minimum level of competency, but they're definitely not a substitute for real-world experience and ongoing education. When you're considering certifications, it's crucial to do your homework. Understand the cost involved, the prerequisites, how the certification is maintained often requires annual fees and ongoing education credits, and its general recognition within the digital forensics community.
And there are different types of certifications available too, aren't there? Some focus on specific software and others maybe with a broader scope.
Yes, exactly. There are tool-specific certifications like the EnCase Certified Examiner, ANCE, and the Access Data Certified Examiner, ACE. These demonstrate proficiency in using a particular vendor's suite of forensic software, but they also cover underlying forensic principles. Then there are more tool-agnostic certifications, things like the Certified Forensic Computer Examiner, CFCE, the Computer Hacking Forensic Investigator, CHFI, various certifications offered by GIAC, Global Information Assurance Certification, and the Certified Forensic Mac Examiner, CFME. These tend to focus more on broader forensic concepts and principles, and they often allow the use of any appropriate tools during the certification process itself.
Okay, so after establishing this foundation of equipment, software, and well-trained personnel, the next critical step seems to be thoroughly understanding the specifics of the case you're dealing with and any relevant legal considerations. You can't just dive into analyzing data without that crucial context, can you?
That's absolutely correct. Gathering comprehensive information about the case and understanding the legal boundaries are essential before you even begin to examine any digital evidence. It's a prerequisite. Investigators need to ask the requesting party, whether that's law enforcement, legal counsel, HR, a detailed set of questions. What is the nature of the investigation? Is it narcotics, homicide, employee misconduct? What specific types of digital evidence are they anticipating finding? Although, be prepared for discrepancies there. What is the legal basis for accessing this evidence? Is it through consent or a search warrant or maybe another legal mechanism? And if a warrant is involved, it is absolutely critical to carefully read and fully understand the scope and any limitations outlined in that document, both in terms of physical locations and the types of digital data authorized for seizure and examination.
Because overstepping those legal boundaries can have very serious repercussions, I imagine, like evidence getting thrown out.
Precisely. There can be significant legal sanctions for exceeding the authority granted by a warrant or other legal means. Evidence can be suppressed, cases weakened. Investigators also need to understand who the key individuals are, in the case the subjects, any potential suspects, and their roles. In some instances, a non-confrontational conversation with these individuals might actually yield valuable information about the digital devices and data involved.
Right, and securing the physical location where evidence might be present and meticulously documenting everything observed is also a crucial part of this initial phase, correct?
Yes, absolutely. Whether it's a law enforcement operation or an internal corporate investigation, properly securing the scene and thoroughly documenting it are fundamental. For law enforcement, this includes controlling access to the area, removing any unnecessary personnel, and creating a detailed record of the scene. Photographic and video documentation are paramount here for potential testimony later in court. In corporate settings, a lack of proper procedures can lead to serious issues. Our source provides an example of a hidden camera discovered in a restroom. If untrained individuals handle that device before a forensic expert gets there, they can inadvertently alter or even destroy crucial data. This really highlights the critical need for organizations to have established incident response procedures and trained personnel ready to handle these situations correctly from the start.
That hidden camera scenario really underscores the potential for well-intentioned but untrained people to completely compromise digital evidence. So what specific questions should an investigator ask if they are presented with digital evidence that someone else has already collected? Maybe it wasn't handled perfectly initially.
That's a great question. When presented with evidence that has already been handled, investigators need to ask a comprehensive set of questions. What was the original reason for seizing the item? Is there any information available about whether it might contain potentially incriminating or, importantly, exculpatory evidence? Evidence that might clear someone? Is there a documented chain of custody from the moment of initial seizure? How many individuals have had access to the evidence, and why? Where was the item originally located? Was it in a secure environment or maybe a publicly accessible area? Are there any relevant dates and times associated with its discovery or seizure? What's the specific focus of the investigation now, and what are the deadlines for the forensic examination?
Wow, okay. It sounds like you almost have to conduct a mini investigation into the history of the evidence itself before you can even begin to analyze its contents. And you mentioned earlier the critical importance of reviewing judicial paperwork. Why is that so essential?
Thoroughly reviewing all relevant judicial paperwork, particularly search warrants, is absolutely essential to fully understand the legally authorized scope of the investigation. You need to know your boundaries. A search warrant will explicitly specify what types of data can be searched for and on which specific devices or locations. For example, in an investigation involving suspected possession of illicit images, the warrant might specifically limit the search only to image files. Investigators must have a crystal clear understanding of these limitations to ensure that all actions taken during the investigation are within legal boundaries. It's also really important for investigators to recognize any potential gaps in their own knowledge or expertise related to the specifics of the case, and to proactively seek assistance or consult with more experienced colleagues when needed. Don't be afraid to ask for help.
Right, better to ask than make a mistake. Okay, so once all of this crucial pre-investigation work has been completed, the strategic planning, the thorough understanding of the legal landscape, then comes the actual process of data acquisition. This is where you finally begin to get your hands on the digital evidence itself, metaphorically speaking.
Exactly. All the preparatory steps we've discussed, making sure you have the necessary training, a properly configured workstation, a well-equipped response kit, a secured scene, and meticulous documentation procedures, they all lead to this critical stage of data acquisition. And the specific scenarios for data acquisition can vary widely. It could be law enforcement seizing computers and devices at a crime scene, or corporate investigators remotely collecting data from employee laptops, or physically imaging server hard drives in a data center.
And I know a significant development in digital forensics over the years has been the understanding of volatile memory.
Hmm.
The old approach of just pulling the power plug. That's definitely no longer acceptable, is it?
Oh, absolutely not. That's ancient history, really. In the past, a common reaction when encountering a running computer at a scene might have been to immediately cut the power, just yank the cord. But we now understand that volatile memory, the data that exists only while the system is powered on, like RAM, can contain extremely valuable forensic data. The pull-the-plug method inevitably results in the immediate and irreversible loss of this potentially crucial information.
So what is the modern forensically sound approach to capturing this kind of temporary fleeting information?
The key is to adhere to the established order of volatility. This dictates collecting data from the most volatile sources first, down to the least volatile. This order generally begins with the live system itself, RAM. CPU registers followed by any running processes, network connections, data held in virtual memory or swap files, and finally the data residing on the physical storage devices like hard drives or SSDs. Now, because the very act of collecting volatile data involves interacting with the running system, it will inevitably cause some level of change to that system. You can't avoid it entirely. Therefore, extremely detailed documentation of every single step taken during volatile data collection is absolutely essential. While these changes often don't impact the core evidence being sought, you need to be prepared to explain any modifications made if you end up in court.
What kinds of valuable information might be lurking in this volatile data? What are we hoping to find?
Volatile data can provide a real-time snapshot of the system's current state at the moment of collection. This might include critical networking information, like the ARP table, active network connections, who was the computer talking to. Also, a list of currently logged on users, all running services and processes, any mounted network shared drives, details of recent remote activity, and even information about open but not yet saved encrypted containers. It's truly a race against time to capture this fleeting evidence before the system is powered down or the data changes.
And I know there's this fundamental principle in digital forensics of working in a forensically sound manner. What does that specifically mean when you're talking about collecting volatile data where you have to interact with the system?
That's a great point. Operating in a forensically sound manner generally means taking steps to acquire data while making the absolute minimum possible changes to the original system. Minimize your footprint. When it comes to volatile data, the order in which you collect different types of information is critical to avoid inadvertently overwriting or otherwise destroying potential evidence lower down the volatility scale. Random access memory, RAM, being the most volatile, is typically the first target for collection. However, there might be specific circumstances where collecting RAM isn't feasible or maybe even advisable. For example, if you identify a destructive process like malware actively wiping data running on the system, prioritizing the collection of that data might be a more strategic decision, even if it means skipping RAM collection for the moment. Similarly, if you suspect a remote attacker has ongoing access to the system, you'll need to carefully weigh the potential value of collecting volatile data against the risk of allowing the attacker to continue their activity or potentially detect your actions.
Right, it sounds like a lot of real-time judgment calls are involved based on the specific situation. And ultimately, the primary goal in most cases is usually to create a complete forensic image of the storage media, the hard drive or SSD, for more in-depth offline analysis later, right?
That's generally the case, yes. Under normal circumstances, directly altering the data on the original digital evidence during the collection process is considered inappropriate. You want to preserve it. However, the increasing prevalence of full disk or volume encryption has significantly changed the landscape here. Simply powering off an encrypted system, that old pull-the-plug approach, is no longer an acceptable practice because you risk making the data completely inaccessible without the correct decryption key.
Can you briefly explain encryption in this context?
Sure. Encryption, at its core, is just a method of scrambling data using an algorithm to protect its confidentiality. It requires a specific key, like a password or a digital certificate, to unlock or decrypt it. While theoretically most encryption methods could be broken given enough time and computing resources, modern encryption standards are incredibly strong. Brute forcing them is often impractical. This is why preserving a running, potentially encrypted system and attempting to acquire the decryption key from memory, or perhaps decrypt the data while the system is still active, has become so crucial in many investigations. Every situation is unique, though. It requires problem-solving skills and often quick decision-making based on the limited information available at the time of acquisition.
Okay. So once the data has been acquired, whether it's a capture of volatile memory or a full forensic image of a drive, how do investigators maintain control and accountability for that evidence? Ensure it hasn't been tampered with. And that's where the concept of the chain of custody comes into play, doesn't it?
Exactly. Maintaining a meticulous and unbroken chain of custody is absolutely fundamental. It's essential for preserving the integrity and ultimately the admissibility of both physical and digital evidence in any legal or administrative proceeding. The chain of custody is essentially a detailed, documented record. It tracks everyone who has handled the evidence, the dates and times they accessed it, and the specific reasons for their access, from seizure to courtroom, basically. NIST provides a sample chain of custody form that serves as an excellent template, although it can be adapted to fit the specific needs of different investigations or organizations. The primary purpose of this comprehensive documentation is twofold: tracking the evidence through every stage of the process, and authenticating it, demonstrating that it hasn't been altered or substituted along the way.
What specific types of information are typically included in this crucial chain of custody documentation? What details need to be recorded?
The form typically includes fields for basic case information: the unique case number, the nature of the offense or incident, the identity of the submitting officer or investigator, information about any victim or suspect involved, and the precise date and location where the evidence was initially seized. Crucially, there's a detailed description of evidence section. Here, each individual item is meticulously documented. This includes assigning a unique item number, noting the quantity, if applicable, and providing a specific description: make, model, serial number, overall condition, any identifying marks or scratches present on the item. Really specific details. Implementing a sequential numbering system for different categories of digital media can really help with organization. For example, using prefixes like CDXXX for CDXX for CDXXX for hard drives, TDXXX for thumb drives, CPXXX for cell phones, and MDXXX for other mobile devices. It helps keep everything straight.
And I know our source also emphasizes the importance of physically marking the evidence items themselves, when possible. Why is that important, and how is it typically done without damaging the item?
Right. Physically marking seized items, whenever it's feasible and won't cause damage, with the date of seizure and the seizing officer's or investigator's initials, provides an additional layer of identification. It helps prevent potential confusion, especially when you're dealing with numerous similar-looking pieces of evidence. But it's vital to do this in a way that doesn't damage the item itself or reduce its potential evidentiary value. For example, you might use a permanent marker on the non-essential parts of a hard drive casing. But for something like an iPad screen, you'd obviously use an adhesive label instead.
Okay, common sense approach there.
Exactly. And the unique identifier that's physically marked on the device, like HDD001, is then consistently used throughout the entire forensic analysis process and in all related documentation reports, notes, everything.
So you have the original evidence properly secured, marked, and meticulously documented within the chain of custody. What's the next step when it comes to the actual analysis? You don't directly work on the original evidence itself, do you? That seems risky.
No, absolutely not. That's a cardinal rule. To ensure the original evidence remains in its pristine, unaltered state, forensic investigators always conduct their analysis on a forensically sound copy of the original data. Always work on a copy. There are 3 primary methods for creating this working copy. The first is a direct forensic copy, sometimes called a clone. This involves a bit-for-bit duplication of the entire contents of the source storage media onto a separate destination drive. This method is actually becoming less common, partly due to storage capacity considerations. And it's absolutely critical to ensure that the destination media is completely clean, forensically wiped before you start, to prevent any potential cross-contamination from previous cases.
Right, you don't want old data mixing with new evidence.
Exactly. The second and more typical method today is creating a forensic image or forensic evidence file. This is also a bit-for-bit copy of the entire source, but the data is usually stored in a special container file format, like DDE01 or AFF. These image file formats can also store important metadata about the acquisition process itself, and they often include built-in integrity checks, like hash values, to verify the accuracy of the copy later on. Now, both forensic copies and forensic images have the capability of recovering deleted files and data that might reside in unallocated space or slack space.
Slack space. Can you clarify that?
Sure. Think of slack space as the leftover storage area at the end of a file within a cluster or block on the drive, like the empty space in a box after you put something in it, but before it's completely full. Deleted file fragments can sometimes linger there.
Got it. And the third method?
The third method is a logical forensic image, or sometimes just called a logical acquisition. Here, only specific files and folders that are deemed relevant to the investigation are selectively copied. This approach is often used when creating a full physical image isn't practical or necessary, maybe when dealing with huge live servers or specific data types. But it's important to note that logical imaging does not typically recover deleted files or data from slack space because you're only copying the active, visible files. We'll definitely delve into the specific technical details of creating these different types of forensic images in a later discussion. Chapter 3 covers that.
Okay, great. So you've got your forensically sound working copy or image ready to go. Now the real work of data analysis begins. With the sheer volume of digital data on modern devices, terabytes even on phones now, it must be incredibly easy to feel completely overwhelmed. Just where do you start?
It certainly can be, absolutely. The sheer amount of data on even a single modern smartphone or computer can be staggering. Terabytes are common. This makes it absolutely crucial for investigators to quickly identify what information is actually relevant to the specific goals of the investigation. You need focus. This is where having and consistently using a personal system for organizing evidence becomes vital. Whether it's a detailed file naming convention, a case management database, or just meticulous notes, whatever works for you, it helps avoid losing track of evidence or misinterpreting its significance. And this is also where all that comprehensive information gathered during the case information and legal issues stage proves its immense value again. Knowing what you're looking for guides the analysis. The ultimate goal of this analysis phase is really to answer those fundamental 5 W's: who, what, when, where, and why, and, critically, to connect digital activities back to the real individuals involved in the case. Attribute the actions.
And while there are obviously specific step-by-step instructions for using different forensic software tools, click here, do this, the fundamental analysis process itself is more about underlying principles and techniques, right? Not just button pushing.
Exactly. Whether an investigator is using a sophisticated commercial forensic suite like EnCase or FTK, or maybe a collection of powerful open source tools like Autopsy and SIFT, the core principles and methodologies of the analysis process remain largely consistent. The tools help, but the thinking is key. One of the initial challenges you often encounter involves dealing with dates and time zones. This can get complicated quickly, especially when digital evidence originates from multiple geographical locations, or maybe when there's a suspicion that a suspect has intentionally altered the system clock on their device to try and obscure things.
Trying to throw investigators off the trail.
Yes. Precisely. So establishing a standard time reference, like Coordinated Universal Time, UTC, for your forensic workstation and your analysis tools is a critical best practice. It provides a consistent baseline. It's also important to be aware that different operating systems and file systems store date and time metadata in various formats and locations. A thorough timeline analysis where events are meticulously placed in chronological order is often absolutely essential for reconstructing the sequence of events in a case.
You also mentioned hash analysis earlier as a powerful technique for quickly identifying irrelevant files and potentially highlighting known contraband or malicious files. Can you explain how this process works in a bit more detail?
Sure. A hash value, as we touched on, is essentially a unique digital fingerprint. It's calculated for a specific file or even a whole chunk of digital media using a one-way cryptographic algorithm. Common hashing algorithms you'll hear about are MD5, which produces a 128-bit hash value, and SHA-1, which generates a slightly longer 160-bit hash. There are newer ones too, like SHA-256. The crucial characteristic of these algorithms is that even an extremely minor change to the original file's content, literally changing a single bit, will result in a completely different hash output. It's extremely sensitive to changes. This makes hashing incredibly effective for 2 main things: verifying the integrity of digital evidence, ensuring a file hasn't been altered since acquisition, and rapidly identifying known files. And just to reiterate, the hashing process is strictly one way. You cannot reverse a hash value to reconstruct the original data. It's not encryption.
Okay, so it's like a unique identifier for a file's exact content at a specific point in time. How is this used in practical investigations to help filter through those massive amounts of data you mentioned?
Investigators utilize what are called hash sets. These are essentially large databases containing the pre-calculated hash values of millions, sometimes billions, of known files. One particularly valuable resource is the National Software Reference Library, NSRL Reference Dataset, RDS, which is maintained by NIST in the US. This RDS contains hash values for a vast collection of known good files, things like common operating system files, standard application files from Microsoft Office, Adobe products, etc. By calculating the hash values of all the files found on a suspect's device and comparing them against the NSRL RDS, investigators can quickly identify and filter out these common, typically irrelevant files. This allows them to focus their precious analysis time on the remaining data that is more likely to be unique or relevant to the investigation.
So it helps clear away the standard system clutter.
Exactly. Now, there are also hash sets of known bad files, malware, contraband images, hacking tools, etc. These are often specific to particular types of investigations, like child exploitation cases, and aren't always as universally comprehensive as the NSRL RDS, but they are critically important in those contexts. It's also important to remember that even if a file's hash matches an entry in the RDS, indicating it's a known application, for instance, the context in which that file is found still needs to be considered. For example, finding hacking tools might be perfectly legitimate for a security professional, but not for someone else. Context is king. Finally, you sometimes hear about the theoretical possibility of hash collisions where two different files happen to produce the exact same hash value. While such collisions are mathematically possible, particularly with older algorithms like MD5, the statistical probability of them occurring naturally is extremely low. This was actually addressed in the 2009 U.S. versus Schmidt court ruling, which deemed the odds insignificant for practical purposes in forensics, though deliberate manipulation is another matter.
Right. Interesting. Okay, so hashing helps identify files based on their content. What about determining the actual file type, regardless of what the file name extension like .jpg or .cs might say this? Users can change those easily, right?
They sure can, and that's where file signature analysis comes into play. Many common file types have specific internal headers, or signatures, which are basically unique sequences of bytes right at the very beginning of the file. These signatures identify the file type to the operating system and applications, irrespective of whatever the file name extension happens to be. Users can easily rename a file, changing its extension, in an attempt to conceal its true nature, maybe trying to hide incriminating documents or images by calling them something innocuous like system files. Yeah. File signature analysis involves examining these internal headers, or sometimes footers, signatures at the end, to verify whether the actual content of the file matches the file extension that's presented. Most modern forensic tools are capable of automatically detecting and flagging these mismatches. For example, a tool might flag a file with a .gif extension, suggesting it's an image, if its internal header actually reveals that it's a zip archive or maybe an executable program. There are great online resources too, like Gary Kessler's filesignatures.net website, which provide a huge database for identifying and understanding various file signatures. Very useful reference.
That's a really useful technique for uncovering deliberately hidden data. Definitely something to look for. Now, what about the common defense you sometimes hear? My computer was infected with a virus. It wasn't me. How do investigators address that possibility and determine if malware was actually involved and responsible?
Yes, the malware did it defense. It's a frequently invoked explanation, so investigators absolutely need to determine if malware is indeed present on the system. And if so, whether that specific malware could plausibly account for the actions under investigation without the user's direct knowledge or interaction. As we discussed earlier, collecting volatile data during acquisition can provide crucial insights into any active malicious processes that were running at the time the system was acquired. That's your first clue. Even when working with a forensic image of a storage device after the fact, many forensic tools offer the capability to mount the image as a read-only drive on the forensic workstation. This allows investigators to run various antivirus scans against the contents of the image using different up-to-date antivirus software, all without risking any modification to the original forensic image itself.
So you can scan the evidence safely.
Exactly. For example, a free tool like FTK Imagers allows you to mount an EO1 image, and then you can just point your installed antivirus software at the mounted drive letter and let it scan. However, and this is absolutely crucial, simply finding malware on a system does not automatically absolve the suspect of responsibility, not by a long shot. Investigators must analyze the specific capabilities of the identified malware. What can it actually do? And then carefully consider the context of all the other evidence found on the system. For example, in investigations involving the possession of illicit child exploitation material, it is extremely rare, almost unheard of, to find malware that is specifically designed to autonomously search for, download, filter, and organize that type of content without any user interaction whatsoever. The malware defense often doesn't hold up under scrutiny when you look at the details.
Right, so it's not just about detecting the presence of malware. It's about understanding its functionality and how it realistically relates or doesn't relate to the specific events or data in question. Context again. And beyond looking at specific files, potential malware, hashes, and signatures, investigators also need to examine the broader operating system and the file system of the digital devices, right? The overall environment.
Absolutely. A huge part of the analysis involves a thorough examination of both the file system and the various operating system artifacts. The file system, remember, is the underlying structure that organizes and manages how data is physically stored on the storage device. Think NTFS on Windows, HFS Plus or APFS on Macs, XT4 on Linux. The operating system, on the other hand, acts as the crucial intermediary between the software applications you use and the computer's hardware. And almost every user action or system event, logging in, opening a file, connecting to Wi-Fi, plugging in a USB drive, searching the web, leaves some kind of digital trace or artifact within the OS logs, registry, configuration files, etc. Understanding how different operating systems and various file systems store and manage this data, where they hide these little breadcrumbs, is absolutely fundamental for uncovering and correctly interpreting these critical forensic artifacts. That's where a lot of the juicy evidence lies.
Okay, wow. After all that detailed and often incredibly complex analysis, the final crucial step, as our source highlights, is to communicate those findings effectively in a clear and understandable manner. The source really emphasizes that creating a well-written report, often for a non-technical audience like lawyers, judges, or executives, is a vital skill in digital forensics, maybe one of the hardest parts.
It is indeed one of the most critical and, yes, often one of the most challenging aspects of the entire process. You could do the best analysis in the world, but if you can't explain it, it's almost worthless. You may need to produce different versions of your report tailored to various audiences, a technical appendix for other experts, a clear summary for management or legal teams. And you must always be prepared to clearly and confidently explain and defend your findings in legal proceedings like depositions or court testimony. Your report is the foundation for that. Thorough and detailed note-taking throughout the entire investigation from the very beginning is absolutely essential for accurately recalling specifics later when you're sitting down to write that report, maybe weeks or months later. This note-taking can take many forms: handwritten notes in a dedicated notebook, typed notes in a secure document, screenshots of key findings as you discover them, and even utilizing built-in journaling or blogging features that are available in some forensic software tools to document your process as you go.
What are some of the key elements that should be consistently included in a comprehensive forensic report? What needs to be in there every time?
A well-structured forensic report should meticulously document a few key things: all relevant communication you've had with other investigators, prosecutors, legal counsel, or maybe corporate executives. The condition of the evidence containers when you received them, were the seals intact. Detailed specifics about each storage device examined. Make, model, serial number, capacity, any observed physical condition or damage. The personal identifiers of all involved parties, suspects, victims, witnesses in criminal cases, or maybe relevant employees, response team members, responsible executives in civil or corporate matters. A clear listing of all the forensic hardware and software tools that were utilized during the investigation, including version numbers. A record of everything that was examined, even if no relevant evidence was ultimately found on a particular device or in a specific area. You need to document the scope of your work. Obviously, a detailed presentation of your actual findings. And, very importantly, a comprehensive glossary to explain any technical terms that might be unfamiliar to the intended non-technical audience. Structuring the report into 3 primary sections is often the most effective approach. First, your main narrative explanation. Second, pertinent exhibits that provide supporting details. And third, any extensive supporting documentation like full file lists.
Okay, let's break down those sections a bit further. What kind of information belongs in that main narrative section of the report? What's the story you're telling there?
The narrative section is really where you tell the story of your investigation. You need to clearly explain the sequence of events, the actions you took as the examiner, and, most importantly, the meaning and significance of the digital artifacts you uncovered. What does it all mean? It should ideally begin with a concise executive summary. This highlights the key findings and conclusions of your examination right up front, so someone can get the gist quickly. This should then be followed by a more detailed narrative. This is where you incorporate screenshots of the most relevant digital artifacts, but crucially, these need clear and thorough explanations alongside them. You have to explain what the screenshot shows and why it is important to the case. When you include screenshots, make sure to focus the reader's attention on the key details you're discussing. Maybe use callouts or highlighting. Don't just dump raw data. And if your investigation involves sensitive content, like illicit images or confidential business data, you'll need to handle those exhibits with appropriate care and sensitivity, potentially creating redacted versions of the report for certain audiences or court filings. Following that executive summary, be sure to include basic administrative information about the case itself and clearly identify all the individuals involved that we mentioned earlier.
What about documenting the evidence itself? The list of items and the specific process of acquiring it. Where does that information typically go in the report to avoid cluttering the narrative?
Good question. For the listing of all analyzed evidence, if you've examined a large number of items, it's often best practice to provide a summary of the key devices within the main narrative itself, just to give context. Then, include a comprehensive, detailed list of all evidence items as an appendix, or perhaps as part of the supporting documentation section at the end. When it comes to describing the process of creating forensic images or acquiring other digital evidence, the deft approach is usually to provide a concise summary of the steps taken within the main narrative, just enough to show you followed proper procedure to maintain readability for the non-technical reader. Then include a much more detailed, step-by-step account of the entire acquisition process, including tools used, hashes generated, any issues encountered, as a separate exhibit. This allows technically inclined readers, like opposing experts, to review your methodology in detail without overwhelming the main body of the report for everyone else.
Right, keeping different audiences in mind. And the analysis section itself is really the core of the report, where you present what you've actually found. What are some best practices for organizing and presenting that crucial information effectively?
The analysis section will typically form the largest part of your report. Definitely. And it's absolutely crucial here to walk the reader through the incriminating or perhaps exculpatory artifacts you have identified. Explain it in a step-by-step manner. What each artifact is, where it was found, and most importantly, why it is significant to the investigation. You have to connect the dots for the reader. Presenting the artifacts either chronologically, based on the timeline of events you've reconstructed, or perhaps thematically, grouped by subject matter like internet activity, file downloads, communication, can make the report much easier for the reader to follow and understand the narrative you're building. For example, in a case involving illegal downloading, you might present evidence showing the identification of the user account involved, then their browser searches for the copyrighted material, then the steps they took to download it using specific software, and maybe any related emails or chat messages. Build the sequence. In a case involving illicit images, you would present artifacts showing the images were accessed or viewed, perhaps shared, along with any relevant operating system artifacts like LNK files or registry entries that provide context about user knowledge or intent. Now, it is absolutely vital here to avoid making definitive statements or assumptions that are not directly and unequivocally supported by the digital evidence. Be objective. For instance, finding an image file in the system's thumbnail cache, thumbs.db, does not definitively prove that the user knowingly viewed that specific image full size. It just means the system likely encountered it. Stick to what the evidence proves.
So, state the fact, but don't overstate the conclusion from it.
Precisely. Stick to presenting factual information and avoid injecting personal opinions or subjective descriptions. Instead of saying a disturbing image, describe it objectively, an image depicting. Remember, definitively proving who is actually sitting at the keyboard using a computer at a specific time can be very challenging based solely on digital evidence. So, use precise language. Avoid making assumptions about device ownership automatically equating to user action unless you have strong corroborating evidence, like eyewitnesses, surveillance video, or specific attribution artifacts. And always, always keep in mind that your report must explain technical details in a way that a non-technical reader can grasp their significance. Simply listing file names or cryptic registry entries without providing clear context and explanation is completely insufficient. You have to bridge that technical gap.
Finally, the conclusion section of the report. This is where you bring all of your findings together. What are the key elements of a strong, effective conclusion?
The conclusion is the section where you can carefully offer your professional opinion based on the totality of the analysis of the digital artifacts you've presented. However, it's still crucial to maintain caution and objectivity. You need to carefully evaluate whether the facts you've presented throughout the report truly support your initial hypotheses or the allegations in the case. Even if your findings are ultimately inconclusive on a particular point, maybe the evidence just isn't heard. It's important to state that clearly and objectively in the conclusion. Don't force a finding that isn't supported. And importantly, you absolutely must also present any potentially exculpatory evidence that might suggest innocence or point away from the suspect that you may have uncovered during your examination. Your job is to find the truth, whatever it is. When it comes to actually distributing the report, electronic delivery in a standard, non-editable format like PDF is common practice today. And digitally signing the report using a trusted certificate helps to ensure its integrity and authenticity, proving it hasn't been altered since you finalized it. Finally, thorough proofreading is absolutely essential. Typos or grammatical errors undermine credibility, and having a trusted colleague perform a peer review of your report before it's finalized is highly, highly recommended. They can catch errors in fact, logic, or clarity that you might miss. Remember, in legal proceedings, the opposition will scrutinize your report word by word, looking for any weakness. Ultimately, if the intended reader of your report, be it a judge, jury, lawyer, or manager, cannot understand your findings and their significance, then the entire effort of the investigation, all that meticulous work, has essentially been wasted. Clarity is paramount.
This has been an incredibly detailed and insightful deep dive into the entire forensic analysis process. Really comprehensive. Just to quickly recap for everyone listening, we've covered pretty much everything from the crucial pre-investigation planning and understanding of legal frameworks, through the critical steps of data acquisition, including the collection of that tricky volatile data, and the absolute necessity of maintaining a proper chain of custody, to the core of the analysis phase, exploring key techniques like forensic imaging, hashing for identification and integrity, file signature analysis to see through disguises, and important considerations around malware and the virus did it defense. And finally, we discussed the vital importance and the challenges of clearly and accurately reporting your findings, especially to a non-technical audience. Making sense of it all.
And it's worth repeating. Always remember, the quality and clarity of your forensic report are a direct reflection, not just on you as an investigator, but on the professionalism and credibility of your entire organization. A well-crafted and easily understandable report is absolutely paramount. It's your final product.
Our source material indicates that a subsequent discussion, Chapter 3 in the book, delves even deeper into the specifics of evidence acquisition techniques and that critical process of tool validation we touched upon. Perhaps those topics could be the focus for our next deep dive. It certainly seems like there's always more to explore within the ever-evolving field of digital forensics.
Oh, definitely. There's always more to learn.
It really highlights the continuous need for learning and adaptation in this domain, doesn't it? Things change so fast.
Indeed. The digital landscape is in constant flux. New devices, new software, new encryption methods, new ways criminals try to hide things, and with that come new challenges and evolving techniques in digital forensics. Continuous learning and staying updated with the latest advancements are not just recommended. They are absolutely essential for anyone working in or even just trying to understand this critical field today. You have to keep running just to stay in place sometimes.